I'm now joined on the line by Jack Barsky, a former KGB operative who worked in the USA undercover and spied on the USA from 1978 to 1988 for over a decade. Jack Barsky, an expert on espionage, born a German citizen, born Albert Dietrich, and a highly successful academic, qualified in a degree in chemistry. And Jack, starting off as Albert Dietrich, how did this life story develop that you found yourself all the way over in the USA under a new name, a new alias as Jack Barsky, working for the KGB?
Yeah, this is one sort of an odd story. I think a lot of young people, as they grow up, they have dreams of what they want to be. I never really knew. Even studying chemistry was sort of, I didn't like anything else, so why don't we do chemistry? I did want to become a professor. I like teaching. I like working with people who I could teach. But then they approached me. The KGB knocked on my door, and that was a very interesting proposal, which eventually I accepted.
Yeah, and Jack, from the time that you accepted that proposal, you weren't parachuted straight away over to the USA. You had to go to Russia, and you had to do extensive sort of training. You were taught Morse code, you were taught cryptography, techniques to avoid surveillance. You were sent to Moscow in 1975, underwent two years further training in the Soviet Union, and all that sort of whirlwind of an experience. Was it something that sort of was exciting, exhilarating? Did it give you a general sort of a rush? Did you always feel that you were doing a greater sort of purpose?
First of all, I got to tell you, I didn't know it then, but I know it now based on some interviews that were given by higher-ups at the KGB. People like me were very, very carefully selected and trained. You just can't give this kind of a job to anybody. And training was extensive. Altogether was 5 years, but 2 of which was intensive language training. Now to the question with regard to did I get a kick out of it? You know, there's a very famous quote, at least in intelligence circles, by Kim Philby, who was KGB, but actually was a double agent because he worked for MI6. And he was asked the question, why did you join the KGB? And he said, you know, you don't think very long when an elite organization makes you an offer to join them. So this pretty much reflects my thinking. I felt like somebody really special.
Yeah, and Jack, the whole journey to get to the USA, I saw a bit of an interview there, and it was sort of rigorous, and you spoke about that trip across Europe and the idea that the worry that several times that you were going to be med even before you even got out of the continent of Europe. And can you tell us about that harassing and nerve-wracking experience of your journey, how you eventually got onto the US shores?
Yeah, well, let me tell you, it was neither exhilarating nor was it nerve-wracking. I just did what I had to do. It was sort of like, I call it in my book, I call it execution mode. You know, this was a task. I had to go and fulfill the task. I did zigzag through Europe quite a bit, using 3 different passports to make sure that there was no trail pointing me back to Moscow before I even made it to the United States. And that's not unusual for agents, particularly for somebody like me, because I had to have no no trace of me that I originated on the other side of the Iron Curtain.
And Jack, the name that was given to you, Jack Barsky, was a child, I believe, that died for a very young age, and you were given his birth cert, but you had to go and acquire a US passport for yourself. And how difficult or a daunting sort of a task was that? Was one of your first tasks to make yourself blend in and become a citizen and to prove without doubt that you are Jack Barsky?
Well, first of all, stealing somebody's identity who has already passed and is not with us anymore was pretty much standard operating procedures. The Russians did a lot of that. And my becoming an American was a very careful entry, so to speak. You know, the first year, until I had enough viable documentation, which most importantly was a driver's license, which is sort of an internal passport in the U.S., and a social security card, which is required if you want to have a job. Up on the first year, I pretty much had no contact with anybody, no social contact. I just stayed at a hotel and, and got to know the city and so forth. And then my first job was then as a bike messenger, which allowed me to interact with people who really weren't that curious about who I was, where I came from, and where I was going. So I learned how to be an American in a very, very safe setting. And by the time I emerged, I went back to college, and at that point I had absorbed enough of the culture that I, particularly in New York City, that I was able to pull this off.
Yeah, and I suppose, Jack, what I would say is many people get sort of missions and many people are placed within certain powers of authority. Was your main focus to collect data and data analysis and systems and in relation to that and send it back? Was that mainly most of your work?
Well, let me tell you what, and this is a really odd, but I understand now that this is the truth. I wasn't really told exactly what my main focus was.
Right.
Again, in hindsight, I found out that my being there was the most important thing for the KGB. They sent, at the time that I went, they sent about 10 quote-unquote sleeper agents in the U.S. And it was very important for them to have some people who, this was high tension. This was the height of the Cold War. If the relations were really bad or war would break out, they would still have somebody in the country. So that's number one. Number two, they asked me to get to know as many people that could be of use and describe them. I never got to a point where I met people that had enough information to gather intelligence myself. That was not necessarily my main task, and they understood that my position in society wasn't such that I wouldn't be able to, interact with people in high positions.
Yeah, and so Jack, you're talking about that, but going over to the USA, were you trained in mechanisms to defend yourself if you were ever made as what you were, a KGB spy, or was there any protocol that would alert you to the fact that maybe the walls were beginning to close around you? Was there any sort of get out? Had you people or operatives working above you that you would constantly fill in or meet up on a regular basis and in relation to passing messages, or were you basically on your own turf, having to stand on your own 2 feet?
I was pretty much on my own. I did get a lot of training to determine as to whether I was being investigated, to determine as to whether somebody would follow me, or my mail was opened, or my apartment was searched. But other than that, I didn't have much help. I also got some training in self-defense. not to fight with the FBI, but just in case I'm caught with some important stuff on me and being attacked by a criminal. But it's all not quite as exciting as you see in the movies or on TV. I also never got any training how to defeat a lie detector. They did not bother with it.
Yeah. So, Jack, you're working here in the US. You're over 10 years. You're transporting probably information that you've gathered or you thought that might be of use back. And how did that work in a time where probably internet technology wasn't as advanced as what it was today? How was it possible for you to relate messages back and receive messages as well?
Well, this was all done the old-fashioned way, which is not necessarily completely out of style today. But there was no electronic communication unless you count shortwave radio. So I received my orders and answers to my questions. All the communication out of Moscow came to me via double encrypted shortwave radio messages.
Right.
I, in turn, sent my reports and whatever I had to communicate through regular mail with letters in secret writing.
Wow.
Obviously, you can't. I was limited to two sheets of paper. You can't put a whole lot of information onto two sheets. So when I had a lot more, I would write it down on paper, take a picture, and then hand over the undeveloped film cartridge, not directly, indirectly, in what's called a dead drop operation, where I would deposit a container that has this film in it someplace, and somebody else would pick it up.
Yeah.
That was it.
Wow.
There was never any meetings. There was never any verbal communication. It was very, very limited in terms of the ability to go back and forth.
And I suppose, Jack, you're based over in the US now. You've been there for a few years. Did you ever come across, while you were there a few years, that other agents were sent over and they made initial point of contact with you, and did you interact with them? Or was it very much that you have to be kept away from anyone else that was coming over in case people would suspect or in case connections were made? Or did you actually, in your time there, did you actually meet new agents that came before you or after you, or the people that you were training with over in Russia? Or was it once you stepped into USA you were completely no ties?
I was never part of a network. My training was all one-on-one. I was fundamentally a lone wolf. I never met another agent on the territory of the United States.
Wow.
But not too long ago, when I was back in Germany, through the services of the Berlin Spy Museum, I met a quote-unquote colleague of mine, an East German who was undercover in New York at the same time I was. We didn't know of each other.
Wow, that's amazing. And Jack, tell me, how did the writing come on the wall, or the phrase for you to decide that this chapter of your life, that you wanted to turn a fresh page, you wanted to turn back on this and move towards a different path in life? How did that come about? Was it because the fact that maybe the walls were closing in around you, or was it you were just fed up of the lifestyle, fed up of living that pattern for over a decade, and you just wanted normality in your life? And how did it come about that you made the decision that I'm finished with this chapter of my life?
Well, it's a little more simple. Spies are people too. And I came to the U.S. as a single person, and as a young, healthy male, I was seeking female companionship, and out of one of those relationships, a child was born.
Congrats.
And I fell in love with that child more so than with any adults I had ever been sort of in love with. and I just, when time came for me to return, because for some reason the Russians thought I was in danger, I just couldn't leave that girl. It was, it would be easy for me to claim, the good life in America, and I wasn't a communist anymore. None of that happened. It was a very personal decision. That down the line, I moved ideologically, philosophically in a different direction. But when I decided to call it quits and become a totally private person, it was just to be with that girl and be able to take care of her. She's 31 years old now, and a beautiful young lady.
Yeah, and Jack, I suppose when you made that decision, did you feel at any stage that your security would now become under jeopardy for the rest of your life? You hear about people who turn on the mob and leave the mob, or you hear of people who leave certain organisations or certain ways of life that once you're born into, once you commit to that life, you're there until you're dead. Did you ever feel that coming out of that KGB that you could leave and once the thing and not ever worry about what's going to happen for the rest of your days?
All right, so the answer is initially yes, because I was concerned that they would come after me, because you really don't leave the KGB. You don't quit. Yeah. But here's the now you got to think about, I had the life ahead of me, and I'm wired to be I'm wired to be a high-risk individual and not worry about things too much. So after 3 months, nothing happened. After they knew, I told them, by the way, I'm not coming. I'm terminally ill. I will seek treatment here, but you don't want me back there. And after the 3 months passed and nobody was contacting me, nobody chased me, I just chose to forget it and live a normal life. It doesn't quite work that way, because the past, if you've been in that kind of an undercover secret world, the past, you can't shed the past. And eventually the FBI found me, and it's an interesting history based on what then became of me. Nowadays I'm a public figure, which never in my wildest imagination I would have thought that would happen. So.
Yeah, and I suppose, Jack, we look back at communism down through the years in relation to Lenin and Stalin and Brezhnev and people like these, and then it sort of transformed for a while under Gorbachev, and lesser extent maybe Yeltsin, and then we see a hardliner like Putin back in throne. So do you think maybe that while it might have the spy network might have maybe died down around the 90s, that with Putin back in charge, what operations that you were under invested, do you think that's still going on today in such an extent, or do you think it's limited, or do you think the scenario that you were brought on happens on a regular basis with Putin in charge of Russia?
Well, the KGB was the most powerful espionage agency in the history of mankind. When the Soviet Union fell apart, what's left over of Russia is not anywhere near as powerful with regard to their resources, money, and so forth. But have they stopped spying? Absolutely not. But you can see, based on how they operate, is that they're not as careful. They don't care as much that to be uncovered. They're using all kinds of different ways and methods. The problem is still there, but again, the sophistication, the level of sophistication is not there. If you want to worry about espionage coming from the East, I think the Chinese are a whole lot more skillful these days, and you don't hear about them. And they do just as much, if not more, than the Russians.
Yeah, and Jack, when you hear about critics and you see what happened to Lechinko and Skripal in London and England, and these sort of attacks that were carried out of people who openly criticise the Russian government who have direct links, are you careful in being a public figure now that you feel, right, I can't be too overcritical of an organisation that I was in case it goes back to higher authority figures, higher agents, that I might be a victim of an anthrax attack or something?
There's a good question. There's some things I won't say, some places I won't go to, and some things I won't do.
Right.
Other than that, by comparison, the level of danger for me is not super high, but it's not zero either. So, I'm a bit careful these days.
Yeah, and I suppose, Jack, I suppose we leave you off now in this question about true stories. It's been an amazing life. It's been a real interesting life. It's gone the full circle for you. Would you, if you started all over again and you're back as a chemistry student and you knew what the future would have held for you, would you have gone down the same journey all over again?
This question is hypothetical because nobody knows how things will turn out. But given similar circumstances, given my ideological contamination, if you will, given my strong belief in communism, and given my adventurous nature, I can't see how I would have made different decisions. I got really lucky. I shouldn't be alive. I shouldn't be talking to you because I'm an exception to the rule. People who either don't make it or they self-destruct eventually because it's not an easy thing to live, somebody else's life. My life was really interesting, and it still is. So how can I say it was bad? I am very sorry that I hurt some people in the process. I wish I could undo that, but that's not possible. But to the extent I can, I live a very moral life, and I try to be the best father, husband, colleague, friend I can be nowadays. And I do have a message with regard to communism, as well as even working undercover for whoever your boss might be. So that's a long answer. It's a sort of a gray answer, but my life has not been black and white anyway, so I can't give you something more definitive.
Yeah, and Jack, I forgot to ask you this, and there's one point there that's sticking out to me as I look at my bullet points for this interview. Your relationship when you came towards the FBI and you let them know who you were, how did that relationship develop over the years? Was it one of contempt and disgust, and were they looking, right, we're going to throw this man behind bars for the rest of his life, so we're going to extract every bit of knowledge we can out of him, or was it one that they felt was one that sort of grew over the years as well? This guy is no threat to society, no civilization, he's not going to be acting anymore, we can let him go on and live a normal life? Or do you feel sometimes that even the USA still have you under surveillance?
All right. The answer to the last question is no. Do I know 100%? No, I don't. But this is what I found out from the fellow who is now a good friend of mine, the lead agent in my case, the FBI agent. They, from day one, when they heard that there's somebody like me in existence, the focus was to get me to cooperate. This is when you find out that there's a person who is an agent of another force, you try to turn them. You always do. That's your this is a knee-jerk reaction, because to put somebody in jail, what good does it do the country?
Yeah.
I would have cost the United States a lot of money. And this is a quote directly from my FBI friend. He said I was much more valuable to them, telling them everything I knew about the training and the methods of operation and so forth, as well as telling them what I didn't do, because that's important. You know, because they had some idea maybe that I was running agents, and there's a lot of paranoia in intelligence circles. So I was much more valuable telling them what I knew than someplace rotting in jail. So, and it was a trade. It's not because they wanted to be nice to me, and so I gave them what I knew, and they allowed me to exist here. I'm now a citizen of the United States.
And Jack, that's a great point to in this interview on True Stories, the life of Jack Barsky. What a wonderful story, and I'm sure it's going to, in time, as you said, your book, Deep Undercover, I would advise all our audience to go out, purchase that book. It is an amazing read, and no doubt, Jack, your life story, we'll see it on the big screen sometime in the near future. Jack Barsky, it's been a pleasure talking to you on the airwaves this evening, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavours. Take care, Jack.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.